name is Chris. Today I'm going to show you how to make a honey cinnamon pound cake along with this gooey, delicious apple topping. For also with honey and syrup and cardamom. It's delicious. We're making it for Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, and traditionally people would eat apple stick and honey to bring sweet tidings for the new year. This recipe comes from the Modern Jewish Cookbook. We're using the honey cinnamon pound cake recipe, and then we're modifying the maple glazed pear recipe to have apples instead because it is Rosh Hashanah. So let's get right to it. The ingredients you need for this recipe are vanilla extract, softened butter, or if you keep kosher, you would be using vegetable oil, a full cup of butter, and a quarter cup of vegetable oil if you're substituting, sugar, kosher salt. It calls for cake flour, which I don't have, but you can substitute your own by mixing all-purpose flour and cornstarch, so we'll be doing that instead. Cake flour is milled twice, so it's like a lighter, fluffier flour. It makes it a lighter, fluffier cake, but substituting cornstarch, which is really fine powder, for a little bit of the all-purpose flour will give it that same similar texture. So it's an easier, faster, cheaper swap because cake flour is kind of hard to find. Honey, orange juice, baking powder, cinnamon, and 4 eggs. The first step for this recipe is to preheat your oven, which is behind me, to 325 degrees. So you'll have that getting started and warmed up, so when you're done baking, you can just put it right in the oven. And then you're going to take your 9x5 loaf pan and you're going to grease and flour it. Since we already got butter, I'm just going to use a little bit more butter. And you want to make sure you get all the corners. That's where it's going to stick. If you don't get the corners, your cake's not going to come out of the pan as easily. So it's important to get everything. And softened butter works really well. Again, if you're keeping kosher, use Crisco, which is a vegetable shortening. Once you're completely covered, top, bottom, sides, or not really top, bottom, sides, all the corners, you're just going to pour in a little bit of flour. And dust the pan. And you'll be able to see if you missed any spots because there won't be flour sticking to it. So that's happening. You should go back in, get that with some butter or shortening, that way your cake doesn't stick. And then you're just going to dump out the excess. Next, we're going to whisk together our dry ingredients. Like I said, we're substituting an alternative for cake flour. So it calls for a 1.5 cups of cake flour, so you're going to scoop out a 1.5 cups. That's 1. And 1/2. And then to make this more similar to cake flour, we're going to take out, for each cup, 2 tablespoons of flour. So since it's a 1.5 cups, it's going to be 3. So we're going to take out 3 tablespoons. And replace those 3 tablespoons with 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. 3. And then we're going to whisk this really well because you want it to be really completely blended because we are making fake cake flour. It's recommended that you actually sift everything together, but I don't have a sifter and I don't expect anyone to run out at the last minute to buy a sifter, so whisking it is just as good, just not fancy. So our flour is fully incorporated. We're now going to add the rest of our dry goods. So it's going to be 1/2 teaspoon, which is a little one, of kosher salt. Half a teaspoon of the baking powder. And a full teaspoon of our cinnamon. And again, we're going to whisk it all together. Once this is fully whisked, we're going to put everything to the side and start working on our wet ingredients. For our liquid ingredients, we're going to mix together the 1 cup of butter or the 1/4 cup of vegetable oil, a 1/4 cup of honey, and then next is 1 cup of sugar, Then we are going to cream all of this together with our beater. You want it to be a creamy, fluffy mixture. So it's going to take a little while. You're going to be like, this is going forever. But that fluffier mixture is going to make a better cake. So you do want to take the time to actually have that be like really fluffy. We've finished beating together all of the sugar and honey and butter. So it's a much lighter color. It's pretty light and fluffy. We're now going to add the remaining wet ingredients, which is our honey, vanilla extract, and eggs. For when you're measuring wet ingredients, you want to look at it at the level that you're pouring at. You don't want to hold it up and like tilt it back and forth, or look at it from above because there is a bit of a curve to it. It's called the meniscus if you're taking a science class right now. And the way water and liquids work, it kind of crawls up the side. So the high point isn't the actual amount you have. If you're taking science, they're telling you all this. It makes more of a difference with chemicals, but baking is a science. So when I pour, I want to look at it at a level to make sure I'm not putting too much in there. And that is a 1/4 cup of our orange juice. We're gonna pour that in. And then a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Another teaspoon. And then our 4 eggs. We are now going to beat these together again until it's smooth and fluffy and fully mixed. Alrighty, we are mixed, we are fluffy and fully blended. So now we're going to start adding into our flour. You're going to add it a little bit at a time. Don't dump the whole thing in. It's going to take forever to mix. And you're just going to keep blending it. So we're going to do about 1/4 to 1/3, and then we're going to start blending it. All of our flour is now beaten into the wet ingredients, and it is so light and fluffy that you know this cake is going to also be a very light and fluffy cake. So now it is time to just pour it into our loaf pan. So we're just going to scrape it in there. Once it's in the pan, you want to make sure that it's evenly distributed. This giant hole up here you want to fill in, so just use your rubber spatula and swish it around. Make sure it's pretty level looking. Once it is evenly spread around, you're going to put it in the oven for an hour or 70 minutes. Just check in at an hour mark with a toothpick to make sure that it is fully cooked. And just, if it's a little gooey still on the inside, add the extra 10 minutes. While our cake is baking behind us, we're going to now start making our topping. So we're going to need 5 apples. I'm using Granny Smith because they're a really good baking apple because they don't have as much juice. It's going to be a gooey topping, so you can just use your favorite apple anyway because it's going to be more liquidy, more of a sauce. I just have a strong preference for Granny Smith. Kosher salt, lemon, maple syrup, honey, cardamom, and ground cinnamon. We're going to start by coring and segmenting our apples. You can either use a paring knife, which takes a little bit longer, but you get to make the wedges and then just scoop out all the seeds from the middle, or just use an apple core, which is much faster. And then you're going to take your apple slices and just pop them right into a 9x13 baking pan. And if any of them, when you use the core, come out a little wonky, you definitely have some seeds in there, just go back in with a paring knife and get that tough part out of there. Also watch where your fingers are when you're using the knife. You don't want to cut your hands, so just be aware of where they are at all times. All of our apples are cut up. They are in our baking dish, so now we're going to mix together the rest of our ingredients in a bowl. First, we're going to use 1/3 of a cup of maple syrup. And again, we're going to do that thing where we look for the meniscus. So we're going to get down here. And then it also calls for 1/3 of a cup of honey. So rather than pouring it out and refilling it, we're just going to do We're at a third of a cup, plus a third of a cup is 2/3. So we're just going to pour them both in together. They're all going to mix together at the end anyway. So that is 2/3 of a cup. And this time I rinsed it out with hot water, so it should just pour right in. Next is a tablespoon of lemon juice. It adds flavor and also keeps the apples from browning too much, but they're going to be cooked anyway, so it's fine. You can use a fresh squeezed lemon. I didn't have one, but I do have one of these convenient little lemon juice bottles that's shaped like a lemon. It calls for a tablespoon of water, 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, half a teaspoon of cardamom, and then 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt. Once your apples are fully covered, you're going to bake it at 375 for 25 to 35 minutes until your apples are tender. But they're all apples, so if you like them a little bit firmer, you don't have to cook it as long. It's really to taste because you don't have to worry about cooking it all the way through because there's no raws or anything in it. So we're just going to wait for our cake to come out so that we can put this into the oven because they do cook at different temperatures. Our honey cake is out of the oven. I turned it out of the pan. It popped out no problems. And I decided to make a decorative layer of apples on the top. You can just serve them on the side, let everyone have as much as they want. There's a ton left over on the pan behind me because it is a lot of apples. Because who doesn't love like a warm, gooey, seasoned cinnamony apple? But it's Rosh Hashanah, so we're going to be decorative and fancy. And it is ready to cut into and enjoy. I hope you enjoyed learning how to make a honey cake and that you get to go make your own and have some because it is delicious.
Support public libraries. Like, share, and subscribe for more great videos.